Who's the old guy filing paperwork? Probably just some retiree who can't afford Florida, Officer Reyes muttered to his partner, watching the elderly man meticulously organizing case files in the records room. The white-haired volunteer, Harold Winters, 72, didn't look up, his weathered hands carefully aligning each folder with practiced precision. He was just the station helper, a fixture easily dismissed. But later, after a reckless comment led to his departure, and Detective Sawyer investigated his background, a different question echoed through the precinct. Why didn't you tell us who you really were, sir? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Harold Winters found solace in the methodical organization of paperwork and the quiet rhythm of the Springdale Police Department. For the past 3 years since Marilyn passed, and his pension stretched increasingly thin against rising costs, he'd volunteered at the station 4 days a week, helping maintain the labyrinthine filing system and handling basic administrative tasks that freed up officers for more pressing matters. He was a man of precision. His handwriting was impeccably neat, his filing system flawless, the desk he used always spotless when he left each evening. He maintained a polite but reserved demeanor with the officers, exchanging brief greetings and answering questions directly, but rarely initiating conversation. He dressed simply but properly, pressed khaki slacks, button-down shirts with the sleeves rolled precisely to mid-forearm even in summer, and practical brown leather shoes polished to a soft shine. In winter, he added a modest navy cardigan, frayed slightly at the cuffs but always clean. The younger officers, busy with their careers and caught up in the day's emergencies, barely registered Harold beyond occasional thanks when he located a misplaced file. To them, he was practically part of the furniture, the quiet old volunteer, slightly old-fashioned, harmless and easily overlooked. Some of the veteran officers were kind, occasionally bringing him coffee or including him in lunch orders. Others were indifferent, treating him as they might a vending machine, useful when needed, otherwise invisible. A few of the rookies, particularly Officer Reyes and his circle, occasionally made quiet jokes at Harold's expense when paperwork piled up. "Grandpa's got his work cut out for him today," they'd chuckle, or, "Better not mess up the old man's system, or he'll have a coronary." They assumed his silence, and simple tasks meant a simple mind, a life of little consequence. Harold heard them sometimes, his hearing far better than they suspected, but he never reacted. He wasn't there for their approval or admiration. He was there for the order, the routine, the sense of purpose that came from supporting law enforcement. Even in this modest capacity, it was a purpose that felt familiar, grounding in its humble utility. No one at the Springdale PD knew that the hands now methodically organizing case files had once led complex federal investigations, had authorized wiretaps on organized crime figures, had shaken hands with 2 presidents, and been consulted by foreign law enforcement agencies. Former Special Agent Harold Winters, retired FBI Counterintelligence Division, recipient of the Purple Heart for injuries sustained during military service before joining the Bureau, decorated with numerous commendations, including the FBI Medal for Meritorious Achievement, preferred his anonymity. The titles and accolades felt like they belonged to another man, a younger version of himself from a different lifetime. Here, he was just Harold, keeping the paperwork flowing. The small office they'd provided him in the back of the records room suited him perfectly, out of the way, functional and private. He'd made no personal additions save for a small, nondescript desk clock that had been with him since his bureau days. What no one noticed was that Harold maintained his own meticulous mental catalogue of the cases that crossed his desk. His trained eye caught patterns and connections the younger officers sometimes missed. Occasionally, he would quietly refile certain documents together or subtly place folders where specific detectives might notice them, small nudges in the right direction without overstepping his boundaries. He took satisfaction in watching cases resolve, sometimes faster than they might have otherwise. His routine rarely varied. He arrived at 8:30 a.m. sharp, took a 30-minute lunch at his desk at precisely noon, and departed at 4:30 p.m. The consistency was comforting after a career of unpredictable hours and high-stakes operations. On particularly hot days, he would roll his sleeves slightly higher than usual, but always with the same careful precision, never exposing the faded Purple Heart tattoo on his upper right forearm, a remnant from his military days before the FBI. The incident that disrupted Harold's quiet routine began, as such things often do, with carelessness and the pervasive reach of social media. It was a Friday afternoon, the station unusually busy with end-of-week paperwork and processing weekend arrests. The air conditioning had failed in the main bullpen, leaving officers irritable in the late August heat. Officer Jason Reyes, frustrated, after a difficult shift and facing a stack of reports that needed filing, dumped them unceremoniously on Harold's desk. "Special delivery for records, Pops. Try to get through these before the next ice age, huh?" Several nearby officers chuckled. Harold simply nodded, already beginning to organize the chaotic pile. "Seriously, though," Reyes continued, playing to his audience. "No rush. Not like you've got a hot date waiting, right?" More laughter followed. Harold remained focused on his task, his expression unchanged. Reyes, emboldened by the attention and irritated by Harold's non-reaction, pulled out his phone. "This is premium content right here. The last dinosaur who doesn't know what a computer is." He began recording, providing mocking narration. "And here we have a rare specimen, Philiosaurus rex in his natural habitat. Notice the methodical movements, completely unaware that technology made his job obsolete 30 years ago." Harold continued working, though his movements slowed slightly. Later that evening, Reyes posted the video to a private social media group for local law enforcement, captioning it, "Ancient relic still working at Springdale PD. Bet he thinks Hoover is still running the FBI." The post quickly accumulated. Likes, laughing emojis, and similar comments from officers across several precincts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That's the guy who still uses a flip phone." One comment read, "Does he come with the building, or did someone bring him in from a museum?" Added another, "Pretty sure I saw him using whiteout on a computer screen once." A third officer contributed. No one defended Harold. No one questioned the casual disrespect directed at a man who quietly served their department day after day. The video eventually came to the attention of Captain Eleanor Rivera, who had recently taken command of the precinct. She was conducting a routine review of departmental social media activity when the post appeared in her feed. Watching the clip, she felt a surge of disappointment in her officers. This wasn't the culture she wanted to foster. She called an immediate meeting with Sergeant Phillips, who supervised the records department. "How long has Mr. Winters been volunteering with us?" she asked. Phillips shrugged. 3, maybe 4 years. He was here when I transferred in. Never causes trouble, never calls out sick. Honestly, Captain, the records room has never run more efficiently. And what do we know about him? "Not much," Phillips admitted. "Retired widower, I think. Keeps to himself." "Why?" Captain Rivera played the video for him. Phillips winced visibly. "This isn't acceptable," she said firmly. "Not in my precinct. I want Officer Reyes in my office Monday morning, and draft a memo about social media conduct and workplace respect." "Yes, ma'am." "And Phillips? Find out more about Mr. Winters. If he's giving his time to this department, the least we can do is know who he is." The following Monday, Harold arrived at his usual time to find his desk area disturbed. Several files were missing, and a sticky note from Sergeant Phillips requested he come to the administration office to update some paperwork. Harold understood bureaucracy well enough to recognize when something had changed. He straightened his already straight tie, smoothed his neatly combed white hair, and made his way to the administration office. The young administrative assistant, Melissa, greeted him nervously. "Mr. Winters, we need to update your volunteer paperwork. New regulations require enhanced background checks for all civilian personnel with access to case files. Just a formality." Harold nodded. He knew a pretense when he heard one. "I understand." Melissa handed him a thick packet of forms. "If you could fill these out, there's a table in the break room you can use." Harold took the forms without comment and found the empty break room. He sat down and began methodically reading through the paperwork. New liability waivers, confidentiality agreements, and an extensive background check authorization form that went far beyond what would be needed for a simple file clerk. He recognized the gentle push when he saw it. Someone had decided he was a liability, likely because of his age, and was creating procedural obstacles to ease him out. Rather than cause a fuss, Harold signed the necessary forms, provided only the most basic information requested, and returned them to Melissa. "Thank you, Mr. Winters," she said, not quite meeting his eyes. "Captain Rivera says we'll need to temporarily suspend your volunteer status while these are processed. Standard procedure." "Of course," Harold replied evenly. "Shall I clear out my desk?" Melissa looked uncomfortable. "If you wouldn't mind, just temporarily, of course." Harold returned to the records room, collected his desk clock and reading glasses case, and straightened the files he'd been working on. He left his small office exactly as he'd found it 3 years ago, clean, organized, and impersonal. He nodded to the few officers who passed him, ignored the curious glances, and walked out of the station with the same quiet dignity with which he'd entered it every day for years. He didn't mention his 27 years with the FBI, his commendations, or the fact that he'd once led a task force that prevented a domestic terrorist attack in a city not 30 miles from Springdale. He didn't explain that his filing system was modeled after one he'd developed for the Bureau, later adopted by field offices across the country. He said nothing about the Purple Heart earned during a classified operation in Southeast Asia before he joined the FBI, or about the 3 citations for bravery during his Bureau career. As Harold Winters walked home that afternoon, the late summer sun warm on his face, he felt a familiar emptiness settling in. He'd lost his daily purpose again, just as he had when he'd retired from the Bureau, and again when Marilyn had passed. At 72, he wondered if he had another reinvention left in him. The absence of old Harold was barely noticed at first. The records room quickly descended into its previous state of organized chaos. Files went missing, reports were misfiled, and the backlog began to grow. Officer Reyes and his cohort briefly congratulated themselves on solving the dinosaur problem and moved on to other amusements. But Detective Sawyer, recently transferred to Springdale from Chicago PD's Major Crimes Unit, noticed the deteriorating situation in records. She'd been working a series of burglaries with an elusive pattern, and the disorganization was hampering her investigation. "Who was handling records before?" she asked Phillips, after searching fruitlessly for a case file. "We had a volunteer, older gentleman named Winters. He's on administrative leave while his paperwork gets updated." "Administrative leave for a volunteer?" Sawyer raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like bureaucratic speak for shown the door." "What happened?" Phillips shifted uncomfortably. "There was an incident. Some of the younger officers were less than respectful. Video got posted. Captain's handling it. I need those files, Sergeant. If this Winters knew where everything was, I want to talk to him. I can give you his contact information, but honestly, Detective, I wouldn't count on him coming back. That video was pretty humiliating." Sawyer's expression hardened. "Show me." After viewing the video, Detective Sawyer was quiet for a long moment. Does anyone know anything about this man? Where he worked before? Family? Background? Phillips shook his head. Not really. Captain asked me to look into it, but his volunteer paperwork just has basics. Retired, former government employee, clean background check, no red flags, but not much detail. Government employee could mean anything from postal worker to CIA, Sawyer mused. I'm going to talk to him. About the files? About the files, Sawyer confirmed, and about showing some respect to people who serve this department. Harold Winters lived in a modest one-story home in an older neighborhood of Springdale. The lawn was neatly maintained, the paint fresh if not fashionable, the overall impression one of quiet dignity rather than ostentation. As Detective Sawyer approached the front door, she noted the precision of the garden, not elaborate, but methodically tended, every plant in its proper place. Harold answered on the second knock, dressed in similar attire to what he wore at the station, pressed slacks and a button-down shirt, as if he were expecting company. His eyes registered mild surprise at seeing a police detective on his doorstep. Mr. Winters, I'm Detective Kate Sawyer, Springdale PD. I was hoping we could talk. Harold nodded and gestured her inside. The interior of his home matched the exterior, modest, meticulously neat, with furniture that spoke of quality but not luxury. A few photographs in simple frames adorned the mantel, mostly of a smiling woman Sawyer assumed was his late wife. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with volumes on history, law enforcement, and international relations. Would you like some coffee, Detective? Harold offered, his manner polite but reserved. Thank you, that would be nice. Harold moved to the kitchen with efficiency, preparing coffee with the same methodical precision he'd applied to filing. When he returned with 2 cups, Sawyer noticed something she hadn't seen before. As he reached to set down her cup, his sleeve rode up slightly, revealing the edge of what appeared to be a tattoo on his forearm. Mr. Winters, I'll be direct. We're having trouble locating files since you left. The record system has fallen apart, and I'm working a time-sensitive case. I was hoping you might help me understand your filing system. Harold took a measured sip of his coffee. I'd be happy to explain it, Detective. It's actually quite straightforward once you understand the principles behind it. As he began to explain, he gestured with his right hand, and his sleeve rode up further. Sawyer's eyes widened slightly as she recognized the distinctive shape of a Purple Heart tattoo, partially visible beneath his cuff. Mr. Winters, she interrupted gently, you were military. Harold paused, glancing down at his exposed forearm. With deliberate care, he rolled his sleeve back down. A long time ago, yes. And after that? Sawyer pressed, her detective's instincts telling her there was much more to Harold Winters than anyone at the precinct had bothered to learn. Harold studied her for a moment, assessing. Federal Bureau of Investigation, he said finally. I retired as special agent in charge of counterintelligence for the regional field office. Sawyer set her coffee cup down carefully. You were FBI counterintelligence, and you've been filing paperwork as a volunteer at our precinct for 3 years. A small smile touched Harold's lips. I find I sleep better when I'm useful, Detective. And paperwork has always had a certain calming effect on me. Does anyone at the station know about your background? It never seemed relevant to mention it. Sawyer leaned forward. Mr. Winters, may I ask why? Most men with your credentials would at least mention it. Harold considered the question. When you reach my age, Detective, you realize that who you were matters less than who you are. Titles fade. So do accolades. What remains is the work itself, and whether it's done well. He paused. And perhaps I wanted to see if I would be valued for what I contributed, not for what I once was. Sawyer nodded slowly, a plan forming in her mind. Mr. Winters, would you consider returning to the station? Not just to help me find these files, but to resume your position. Under the circumstances, Detective, I'm not sure that would be comfortable for anyone involved. Let me worry about that, Sawyer said. I think it's time the Springdale PD learned a lesson about judging books by their covers. When she left Harold's home an hour later, Sawyer had not only detailed notes on his filing system, but a much clearer picture of the man who had been quietly serving their precinct. She drove directly to Captain Rivera's office. Captain Eleanor. Rivera listened intently as Detective Sawyer outlined what she'd discovered about Harold Winters. With each revelation, his Purple Heart from classified military operations, his 27 years with the FBI, his role as special agent in charge of counterintelligence, the task force he'd led that prevented a domestic terrorist attack. The captain's expression shifted from surprise to dismay to determination. He never mentioned any of this? Rivera asked, scanning the notes Sawyer had compiled. Not a word, Sawyer confirmed. According to Sergeant Phillips, his volunteer paperwork just listed former government employee. Winters told me he wanted to be valued for what he contributed, not for what he once was. Rivera sat back in her chair, shaking her head. And instead, we had officers mocking him and recording it for social media entertainment. Officer Reyes wasn't the only one, Sawyer pointed out. The comments section was filled with officers from our precinct and others. It's a culture problem, Captain. Rivera was silent for a moment, her fingers drumming thoughtfully on her desk. I've only been in command here for 6 weeks. This isn't the department culture I want to foster. She looked up at Sawyer with newfound resolve. I want you to go back to Mr. Winters. Tell him I'd like to meet with him personally. With all due respect, Captain, I don't think an apology is going to be enough. He's a man who values actions over words. I'm not planning to just apologize, Detective. I have something else in mind, something that might benefit the department and Mr. Winters, and perhaps teach our officers a valuable lesson in the process. Sawyer nodded, a slight smile forming. I think I understand, Captain. I'll speak with him tomorrow. Good. And Detective, pull everything you can find on Harold Winters. Bureau commendations, service records, case histories, anything that's publicly available. I want to know exactly who we've been taking for granted. Detective Sawyer spent that evening researching Harold Winters. Though much of his FBI work remained classified, she found enough to paint a remarkable picture. Mentions in redacted. Case files, commendations reported in Bureau newsletters, his name in congressional testimony, transcripts regarding counterintelligence operations. She even located a faded newspaper clipping about a task force he'd led that disrupted a domestic terrorist cell planning to bomb a federal building in a nearby city. The more she discovered, the more she understood why this quiet man who organized their files might have valued his anonymity. The next morning, Sawyer returned to Harold's modest home. He answered the door in his customary pressed shirt and slacks, appearing unsurprised by her second visit. Detective Sawyer, he greeted her with a small nod. Have you found your files? Not yet, Mr. Winters. May I come in? I have a proposition for you from Captain Rivera. Harold gestured her inside. They sat in his meticulously organized living room, sunshine streaming through windows that overlooked his carefully tended garden. Captain Rivera would like to meet with you, Sawyer began. She's reviewed what I've learned about your background and is, frankly, mortified by how you've been treated. Harold waved a dismissive hand. There's no need for that. Young officers have always tested boundaries. It's nothing I haven't encountered before. This isn't just about an apology, Mr. Winters. The captain has something specific in mind, and she'd like to discuss it with you personally. Harold studied her thoughtfully. What exactly does she have in mind, Detective? She believes your experience could be valuable to the department in ways beyond organizing files. But she'd like to present the idea herself. Would you be willing to meet with her? Harold was quiet for a long moment, his weathered hands resting motionless on his knees. I didn't come forward about my background because I didn't want special treatment, Detective. I simply wanted to be useful. And that's exactly what the captain is offering, a chance to be more useful on your terms. Sawyer leaned forward. Mr. Winters, in my 15 years in law enforcement, I've learned that expertise like yours is rare. Whatever your reasons for keeping your background private, think about what you could offer a department that genuinely values your experience. Another long silence followed as Harold considered her words. Finally, he gave a single, decisive nod. Very well, Detective, when would the captain like to meet? Tomorrow morning, if that works for you, and she'd like to meet here, not at the station. Harold raised an eyebrow, a glimmer of the tactical thinker showing through his reserved exterior. Interesting choice. Neutral ground that's more comfortable for me than for her. Your captain understands psychology. Sawyer smiled. She was a hostage negotiator before she made captain. Very well. Tell Captain Rivera I'll expect her at 10 a.m. The following morning, Captain Rivera arrived at Harold's home in her personal vehicle rather than a department car, dressed in civilian clothes rather than her uniform. Another tactical choice that didn't escape Harold's notice. Detective Sawyer accompanied her, carrying a thick folder of documents. Harold welcomed them with formal courtesy, offering coffee, which Rivera accepted gratefully. As they settled in his living room, Rivera took a moment to observe her surroundings. The bookshelves lined with volumes on intelligence operations, international relations, and criminology. The neatly arranged photographs, the subtle signs of a methodical, disciplined mind. Mr. Winters, Rivera began. First, I want to personally apologize for the disrespect you've experienced at our precinct. It's inexcusable and doesn't represent the values I intend to foster in the department. Harold nodded acknowledgement, but offered no comment. Detective Sawyer has shared some of your background with me, Rivera continued, though I understand much of your work remains classified. What I've learned is impressive, to say the least. That was a different lifetime, Captain, Harold replied evenly. Was it? Rivera challenged gently. From what I understand, you've continued to apply your analytical skills to our case files, even creating a sophisticated organizational system that's fallen apart in your absence. Harold shifted slightly, the first sign of discomfort he'd shown, old habits. Mr. Winters, I'm going to be direct. Our department faces challenges beyond disorganized files. We have a growing problem with cybercrime targeting local businesses. Several cold cases that could benefit from fresh analytical approaches, and younger detectives who need mentoring in investigative techniques. And you believe I could help with these issues? Harold stated rather than asked. I know you could, Rivera affirmed. I'm not asking you to come back as a file clerk, Mr. Winters. I'm proposing a new position, special advisor to the investigative division. You'd work directly with our detectives, providing analytical support, consulting on complex cases, and mentoring younger officers in investigative methodology. Harold's expression remained neutral, but his eyes sharpened with interest. That's quite a leap from volunteer file clerk. Is it? Rivera smiled. Or is it simply recognizing the expertise you've had all along? Detective Sawyer tells me you've already been subtly guiding investigations by how you organized and prioritized files. A hint of a smile touched Harold's lips. I may have made certain connections more visible. Exactly. I'm just proposing we make your contributions official. Harold considered for a long moment. And Officer Reyes and the others involved in that video? Rivera's expression hardened. Officer Reyes will face appropriate disciplinary action, but more importantly, I believe there's a more valuable lesson to be learned here than simple punishment, and can provide. You want to make an example of the situation, Harold observed. I want to transform it into a teaching moment, Rivera corrected, about respect, judgment, and the danger of assumptions. Harold nodded slowly, his tactical mind clearly processing the proposal and its implications. I accept your offer, Captain, on one condition. Name it. I want to be part of how this lesson is delivered. No public humiliation of Officer Reyes or the others. That serves no constructive purpose. Rivera smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. I have some ideas I'd like to discuss. The threesome spoke for another hour, developing a plan that would address both the immediate situation and the deeper cultural issues it revealed. When Rivera and Sawyer left, Harold had agreed to return to the precinct the following Monday in his new capacity. Throughout the rest of the week, subtle changes occurred at the Springdale Police Department. The records room was temporarily closed for reorganization. A small, previously unused office near the detective division was cleared out and furnished. With a desk, computer, and several bookshelves, a new nameplate appeared on the door. H. Winters, Special Advisor. Captain Rivera personally informed Officer Reyes that his social media post had been identified in a review of departmental conduct and that he would need to attend a special training session on Monday morning. Similar notifications went to the other officers who had commented on or reacted to the post. No further explanation was provided, leaving the officers apprehensive about what disciplinary measures might be forthcoming. By Monday morning, rumors were circulating throughout the precinct. Some suggested Rivera was implementing a zero-tolerance policy for social media violations. Others believed Reyes and his cohort would face serious reprimands, possibly even suspension. The mood was tense when the officers gathered in the main conference room as instructed. Captain Rivera entered precisely at 9 a.m., her expression serious as she surveyed the assembled officers. Officer Reyes sat rigidly in the front, his usual cockiness notably absent. "Good morning," Rivera began. "You've been called here today because of a situation involving disrespectful behavior toward a member of our department, which was subsequently shared on social media." Her gaze swept the room. This type of conduct undermines the cohesion and professionalism essential to effective law enforcement. Officer Reyes stared at his hands, his face flushed with embarrassment. "Before we proceed," Rivera continued, "I'd like to introduce someone who will be joining our team in a new capacity." She turned toward the door. "Please welcome our new special advisor to the investigative division." Harold Winters entered the room, but he looked markedly different from the quiet file clerk they remembered. He stood straighter, his gaze direct and penetrating. He wore a crisp navy suit with a subtle FBI pin on his lapel. The transformation was striking, not in his physical appearance, which remained that of a man in his 70s, but in his presence, which now commanded the room. A murmur of confusion rippled through the assembled officers. Officer Reyes looked up, his expression shifting from embarrassment to shock as he recognized the old man from his video, now transformed into someone who radiated quiet authority. "Many of you know Mr. Winters as our volunteer file clerk," Rivera said. "What you didn't know, what none of us bothered to learn, is that before joining our department, Mr. Winters served 27 years with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, retiring as special agent in charge of counterintelligence for the regional field office." The murmur grew louder. Officers exchanged startled glances. "Prior to his FBI service," Rivera continued, "Mr. Winters received the Purple Heart for injuries sustained during classified military operations." She paused, letting the information sink in. "The man some of you mocked as an obsolete relic led investigations that prevented terrorist attacks, identified foreign intelligence operations on U.S. soil, and developed analytical methodologies still used by the Bureau today." Officer Reyes had gone pale, his eyes fixed on Harold with dawning horror. Rather than disciplinary action, Rivera said, I believe there's a more valuable lesson here. Mr. Winters has graciously agreed to lead a series of training sessions on investigative techniques beginning today. Each of you will also be assigned to work directly with him on case analysis over the coming weeks. She turned to Harold. Mr. Winters, would you like to say a few words? Harold stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room before settling on Officer Reyes. I don't hold grudges, Officer Reyes. Neither does any professional in our line of work. Grudges cloud judgment, and clear judgment is what keeps us alive. He addressed the wider group. I didn't mention my background when I joined this department, because titles and past accomplishments mean little compared to present contributions. I was content to be judged by the work I did each day, not by what I had once been. His voice remained even, neither accusatory nor self-righteous. The greatest lessons in my career came from moments of humility, times when I misjudged situations or people and had to face the consequences. I suspect today might be such a moment for some of you. He smiled slightly. Now, let's begin. I understand there's a series of cybercrime cases targeting local businesses that could use a fresh analytical approach. With that, Harold transitioned seamlessly into instructor mode, displaying a command of current cybercrime methodology that quickly captured the officer's attention. Even Officer Reyes, initially slumped in embarrassment, found himself taking notes as Harold outlined analytical techniques for identifying patterns in seemingly unrelated digital intrusions. By the end of the 2-hour session, the atmosphere in the room had transformed. The initial tension had given way to engaged discussion, with officers asking questions and Harold providing insights drawn from decades of experience. He was neither condescending nor overbearing, presenting complex concepts with clarity and relating them to the practical challenges the officers faced daily. As the session concluded, Captain Rivera stepped forward again. This is just the beginning. Mr. Winters will be working directly with our investigative teams going forward. I expect each of you to make full use of his expertise and to demonstrate the respect his experience warrants. As the officers filed out, Officer Reyes lingered, visibly struggling with what to say. Harold approached him directly. Your cybercrime question showed good analytical thinking, Harold said, referring to a question Reyes had hesitantly asked during the session. Mr. Winters, Reyes began, his voice strained. Special Advisor Winters in this context, Harold corrected gently, but Harold is fine when we're not in a formal setting. Sir, I need to apologize for... Harold held up a hand. Officer Reyes, in my experience, apologies matter less than changed behavior. I'd rather see what you do tomorrow than hear what you regret about yesterday. Yes, sir, Reyes responded, standing straighter. That said, Harold continued, I believe you have potential as an investigator. Your question about tracing cryptocurrency showed you're thinking beyond conventional methods. I'd like you to join Detective Sawyer and me tomorrow morning to review the pattern analysis on the Harrison Street burglaries. Reyes looked stunned. You want me to work with you? After what? I did? Especially after what you did, Harold replied. You've just experienced firsthand how appearances can deceive and assumptions can mislead. That's a valuable lesson for any investigator. As Reyes departed, visibly shaken by the encounter, Detective Sawyer approached Harold with an appreciative smile. That was masterfully handled. You could have crushed him. To what end? Harold asked. Humiliation rarely produces growth, Detective. Responsibility and opportunity are far more effective teachers. Still, it must have been satisfying to see their faces when they realized who you really are. Harold considered this. I'm the same person I was when I was filing their paperwork, Detective. The only difference is now they can see it. Over the following days, The impact of Harold's revelation rippled through the precinct. Officers who had previously ignored him now sought his input on cases. Those who had participated in the mockery worked especially hard to demonstrate the Harrison Street burglary case became the first true test of Harold's new role at the Springdale Police Department. What had begun as seemingly random break-ins across an upscale neighborhood had evolved into a sophisticated pattern that had eluded detection for months. Investigators had focused on standard approaches, checking pawn shops, interviewing neighbors, installing additional patrols, all to no avail. On a crisp Tuesday morning, Harold sat in the small conference room adjacent to his new office, surrounded by case files, crime scene photos, and evidence logs. Detective Sawyer and Officer Reyes joined him, both watching intently as the former FBI agent methodically arranged the burglary reports in chronological order. "We've been approaching this backward," Harold observed, his voice calm but authoritative. "We've been looking at what was taken: jewelry, electronics, art, standard high-value items. But the pattern isn't in what they stole." He selected several inventory sheets and arranged them side by side. "It's in what they deliberately left behind." Reyes leaned forward, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Left behind? I don't understand." Harold pointed to the inventory lists. In each home, they bypassed items of obvious value. The Hendersons' home had a collection of rare coins in plain view, untouched. The Patels had sterling silver flatware displayed in a glass cabinet, ignored. The Williamses had limited edition signed prints in their study, left on the walls. Sawyer's eyes widened with dawning realization. They're not opportunistic thieves. They're filling orders. "Precisely," Harold nodded approvingly. "They're working from specific shopping lists, taking only items that have been pre-selected by whoever is fencing the goods." Reyes was studying the crime scene photos with new intensity. "So if we identify what they're specifically targeting, we might be able to trace the fence." "One step further," Harold suggested. "The items they're taking, designer jewelry, specific electronics, particular artwork, they're all easily transportable internationally and difficult to trace once they cross borders." Sawyer straightened in her chair. "You think this is connected to an international operation?" "It bears the hallmarks," Harold confirmed. "During my time with the Bureau, we tracked several networks that operated this way. Targeted acquisitions. Based on overseas demand, professional crews working with detailed intelligence on home layouts and security systems." The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. What they had been treating as local burglaries might be connected to something far larger. "We need to shift our approach entirely," Harold continued. "Instead of tracking what's gone missing here in Springdale, we need to identify where these items might be headed." He turned to Reyes. "Officer, you mentioned during yesterday's training that you had some experience with cryptocurrency tracing. How comfortable are you with international financial networks?" Reyes sat up straighter, surprised at being addressed directly. "I took a specialized course last year on following digital money trails, sir. Not expert level, but I understand the basics of how these operations launder funds." "Good," Harold nodded. "I want you to coordinate with financial crimes. Look for patterns in cryptocurrency transactions originating in our region and terminating overseas, particularly in Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia. Focus on the time frames immediately following our burglaries." Reyes nodded eagerly, pulling out his notebook. "Yes, sir. I'll get on it right away." "Detective Sawyer," Harold continued, "we need to re-interview the victims, but with a new focus. Ask specifically about recent home repairs, service calls, deliveries, anyone who might have had legitimate access to survey the premises in the weeks before the burglaries." "You think they had inside information?" Sawyer asked. These weren't random targets, Harold confirmed. The precision of the entries, the specific items taken, someone cased these homes thoroughly, and they likely did it while hiding in plain sight. As Sawyer and Reyes departed with their assignments, Captain Rivera appeared in the doorway. She observed the crime scene photos and notes spread across the table. "Progress on Harrison Street?" she inquired. Harold offered a small smile. "Potentially. We're exploring new angles." Rivera nodded, then closed the door behind her. "That's not actually why I'm here, Harold. There's been a development I thought you should know about." She handed him a tablet displaying an internal department message board. "Officer Chen started this thread yesterday. It's been gaining traction." Harold examined the screen. Officer Chen, a young patrol officer who had been present during Harold's revelation, had created a post titled "Lessons from Special Advisor Winters." In it, she recounted how her initial assumptions about the old file clerk had prevented her from seeking his input on cases, and how that realization had made her reconsider other assumptions she made on patrol. The post had dozens of responses, from officers sharing similar reflections. Some admitted to dismissing input from older community members, others to making snap judgments based on appearance or occupation. Many expressed how the Harold Winters situation had made them reconsider these tendencies. "It appears your teaching moment is having wider impact than we anticipated," Rivera observed. Harold handed the tablet back, his expression thoughtful. "The best lessons are those people teach themselves, Captain." "There's more," Rivera continued. "Chief Sullivan has heard about our new special advisor and the Harrison Street breakthrough. He's requested you join the command staff meeting tomorrow to discuss expanding your role to include formal training for the entire department." Harold raised an eyebrow. "From file clerk to department trainer in less than 2 weeks? That's quite a promotion, Captain." "Is it a promotion, Harold, or is it simply the department finally recognizing what you've been all along?" Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Officer Reyes stood there, slightly out of breath. "Sorry to interrupt, Captain, Mr. Winters, but I think I found something already. Our cybercrime unit had flagged a series of unusual cryptocurrency transactions, but hadn't connected them to Harrison Street. The timing aligns perfectly with our burglaries." Harold nodded. "Good work, officer. Set up a briefing for tomorrow morning, and Reyes, it's Special Advisor Winters in professional settings." "Yes, sir, Special Advisor Winters," Reyes responded with newfound respect. After Reyes departed, Rivera gave Harold a knowing look. "You're being hard on him." "I'm holding him to a high standard," Harold corrected. "He has potential, but he needs to learn discipline and attention to detail." "The same way someone once taught you?" Rivera suggested. A rare smile crossed Harold's face. "My first bureau supervisor made Reyes look positively diplomatic, but he taught me to think beyond the obvious, to question my assumptions. If Reyes can learn that, he might become an exceptional investigator." The following morning's briefing revealed the first solid lead in the Harrison Street case. Officer Reyes had indeed uncovered a pattern of cryptocurrency transactions that coincided with the burglaries. Detective Sawyer's re-interviews of victims had identified a common thread. A local home security company had conducted free assessments in the neighborhood shortly before the break-ins began. "It's textbook," Harold explained to the assembled team. "They pose as legitimate security consultants, gain access to homes, catalog valuable items, then sell that intelligence to the actual burglary crews." The investigation accelerated rapidly. After that breakthrough, within 3 days, surveillance was established on the security company's operations. Within a week, they had identified the principal fence, a high-end art dealer with connections to Eastern European buyers. The case that had stumped the department for months was now moving toward resolution with remarkable speed. Throughout this process, Harold's interactions with the department continued to evolve. Officers who had once ignored or mocked him now sought his guidance. Some approached with obvious discomfort, clearly remembering their previous dismissive attitude. Others came with genuine questions, eager to learn from his experience. Officer Reyes, perhaps most transformed by the experience, threw himself into the investigation with remarkable dedication. He arrived early each morning, often before Harold himself, armed with new data analysis and eager to discuss emerging patterns in the case. What had begun as a penance was visibly becoming a genuine passion for investigative work. The Harrison Street investigation culminated in a coordinated operation involving multiple jurisdictions. Search warrants were executed simultaneously at 7 locations, including the security company, the art dealer's gallery, and several storage facilities. The recovery of stolen property was extensive, and the arrests included not just the local burglars, but members of an international trafficking network that had operated for years across multiple states. At Captain Rivera's insistence, Harold was present at the command center during the operation, providing real-time analysis as evidence was recovered. When the final arrests were made, a spontaneous round of applause broke out among the officers, not just for the successful resolution of the case, but directed specifically at the elderly former agent who had transformed their approach. As the evidence was being processed back at the precinct, Chief Sullivan himself appeared in the bustling squad room. Conversations hushed as the department head made his way directly to where Harold was quietly reviewing property recovery logs. "Mr. Winters," the chief extended his hand, "I understand we owe this breakthrough to your analytical approach." Harold rose to shake the chief's hand, his demeanor respectful, but unawed. "It was a team effort, Chief Sullivan. Detective Sawyer and Officer Reyes were instrumental in following through on the new leads. Nevertheless," Sullivan continued, "I'm told you identified the pattern that everyone else missed." He glanced around the squad room, taking in the respectful attention of the assembled officers. "I'd like you to join me in my office. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." As Harold followed the chief through the precinct, he noticed something unexpected. Officers nodding to him with genuine respect, not the awkward deference of recent days or the dismissive glances of before, but the authentic acknowledgement. One professional offers another. In Chief Sullivan's office, the conversation was direct and to the point. The success of the Harrison Street case had drawn attention from neighboring jurisdictions, all facing similar sophisticated criminal operations. Sullivan proposed expanding Harold's role to include consulting on major cases throughout the region and developing a formal training program on analytical investigation methods. "This would be a paid position, of course," Sullivan emphasized. "Consultant-level compensation with flexibility to set your own hours." Harold considered the offer carefully. "I didn't come here seeking employment, Chief Sullivan. After retirement, I simply wanted to remain useful in a field I understood. And that's precisely why you're the right person for this role," Sullivan countered. "You're not here for status or career advancement. You're here because you understand that experience has value only when it's shared." Later that afternoon, Harold found himself back in the conference room, this time facing not just Sawyer and Reyes, but a dozen officers from various divisions, all voluntarily gathered to hear his insights on investigative methodology. As he looked at their attentive faces, some young and eager, others veterans with their own wisdom to contribute, he realized he had found a new purpose that honored his past while creating genuine value in the present. The formal training program took shape over the following weeks. Harold insisted on a practical approach, using actual cases rather than theoretical scenarios. He incorporated officers' real-world experiences, creating a collaborative environment where wisdom could flow in multiple directions. Most surprisingly to some, he specifically requested Officer Reyes serve as his assistant in developing the curriculum. "Are you sure about Reyes?" Captain Rivera asked privately after Harold submitted the formal request. "There are more experienced officers available." "Reyes has something more valuable than experience," Harold explained. "He has the perspective of someone who's recognized his own biases and is actively working to overcome them. That makes him uniquely qualified to help others do the same." The transformation in Officer Reyes was indeed remarkable. The cocky young officer who had mocked the old file clerk had become a dedicated student of investigative technique. He arrived each morning with questions that revealed genuine intellectual curiosity and stayed late reviewing cold cases with Harold, absorbing methodology that went far beyond standard police training. One evening, as they were reviewing materials for the next day's training session, Reyes finally broached the subject that had clearly been weighing on him. "Sir," he began hesitantly, "I've never properly apologized for the video, for how I treated you." Harold looked up from the case file he was annotating. "You've been apologizing through your actions every day, Officer Reyes. That's far more meaningful than words." "Still," Reyes persisted, "I need to say it. I was arrogant and disrespectful. I judged you based on nothing but age and position. I'm deeply sorry for that." Harold studied the young officer thoughtfully. "Do you know why I accepted this position, Reyes? To teach us? To share your experience?" "Partially," Harold acknowledged, "but also because your video reminded me of something important, that expertise without humility becomes arrogance, and arrogance leads to blindness." He set down his pen. "Early in my FBI career, I made a similar mistake. I dismissed the insights of a courthouse janitor who tried to tell me about unusual visitors to a judge's chambers. I was a young hotshot agent who couldn't imagine a cleaning man having anything valuable to offer an FBI investigation." Reyes listened intently, recognizing the parallel to his own behavior. 3 weeks later, Harold continued, that judge was indicted for accepting bribes. The janitor had observed what everyone else missed precisely because people treated him as invisible. It was a humbling lesson, one that shaped my entire approach to intelligence gathering from that point forward. "So when I made the same mistake," Reyes began, "I recognized it immediately," Harold confirmed, "and saw an opportunity to transform that mistake into a teaching moment, not just for you, but for the entire department. That's why you wanted me as your assistant," Reyes realized. "Not despite what I did, but because of it." Harold nodded. "The most effective teachers of humility are those who have learned it the hard way." He picked up his pen again. "Now let's finish preparing for tomorrow's session on pattern recognition. I believe you had some interesting ideas about incorporating digital evidence analysis." The ripple effects of Harold's presence at the Springdale Police Department extended far beyond the Harrison Street case. Cold cases were reopened with fresh analytical approaches, clearance rates improved across multiple divisions, and a culture of methodical, evidence-based investigation began to take root throughout the department. Perhaps most significantly, a subtle but profound shift occurred in how officers interacted with the public. Inspired by Harold's story, many became more attentive to the insights of community members they might previously have dismissed. The elderly neighbor who noticed unusual patterns, the maintenance worker with access to multiple buildings, the school crossing guard who observed the same street corner every day for years. This evolving approach led to unexpected breakthroughs in several long-standing cases. A series of commercial burglaries was solved after officers seriously considered the observations of a night janitor. A missing persons case advanced when a retired teacher's seemingly unrelated recollections were recognized as significant. Officers began to understand that valuable intelligence could come from anyone, regardless of title or position. 6 months after Harold's revelation to the department, Chief Sullivan called a special ceremony in the precinct's largest conference room. Officers from every division attended, along with the mayor and several city council members. Captain Rivera had organized the event, but kept its specific purpose confidential, even from Harold himself. As Harold entered the room, he was surprised by the assembled crowd and the formal atmosphere. Chief Sullivan gestured him to the front, where he reluctantly took a seat next to the podium. 6 months ago, Sullivan began, addressing the gathered department. The Springdale Police Department was fortunate enough to discover that we had been overlooking an extraordinary resource. Today, we formally acknowledge that oversight and recognize the contributions that have transformed our investigative approach. The chief detailed the impact of Harold's work, the successful resolution of the Harrison Street case, the development of the analytical training program now being adopted by neighboring jurisdictions, the improved clearance rates across multiple divisions, and the cultural shift in how officers approached investigations and community interactions. But perhaps the most valuable lesson, Sullivan continued, came not from Special Advisor Winter's formal instruction, but from his example. He reminded us that true expertise doesn't demand recognition, that service requires no title, and that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources. Sullivan then revealed the purpose of the gathering, the dedication of the department's newly established Analytical Investigations Center, which would serve as a regional resource for complex cases. A plaque beside the door read simply, "The Harold Winters Center for Analytical Investigation, where wisdom transcends rank." As Harold was invited to speak, he approached the podium with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire career. He surveyed the room, the officers who had once overlooked him now hanging on his every word, the leadership that had recognized the value in his approach, and in the front row, Officer Reyes, who had traveled the furthest journey of all. "I'm honored by this recognition," Harold began, but somewhat concerned by its focus on a single individual. "The successes we've achieved over these past months haven't been the product of one person's wisdom, but of a collective willingness to question assumptions and consider new perspectives." He gestured to the assembled officers. "Each of you has contributed to this evolution in your own way. You've brought your unique experiences and insights to the table. You've been willing to reconsider established methods. Most importantly, you've demonstrated that a learning organization is far more effective than even the most brilliant individual." Harold's gaze settled on Officer Reyes. "Some of you have shown particular courage in challenging your own preconceptions. That kind of intellectual honesty is far rarer and more valuable than any technical expertise." He turned back to address the wider audience. "The plaque on this center bears my name, but the spirit it represents belongs to all of you. It stands for the principle that wisdom can come from anywhere, from a veteran detective or a rookie patrol officer, from a federal agent or a file clerk. Our job is not to presume where insight will emerge, but to remain open to recognizing it wherever it appears." As the ceremony concluded and officers approached to congratulate him, Harold noticed a young woman in civilian clothes waiting patiently at the edge of the crowd. When the officers had dispersed, she stepped forward and introduced herself. "As a reporter from the Springdale Gazette, Mr. Winters," she began, "I'm working on a feature about your journey from volunteer file clerk to the namesake of the department's new investigative center. Would you be willing to share your story?" Harold considered her request with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "The story isn't really about me," he said finally. It's about what happens when people look beyond appearances and titles to recognize the value each person brings. That's exactly why it should be told, the reporter persisted, especially in today's world, where we're so quick to judge based on age or position. Harold was silent for a moment, then nodded. On one condition. The story must include Officer Reyes and his role in this transformation. What might have remained a simple case of disrespect became a catalyst for positive change because of how he responded to it. The reporter looked surprised. The officer who made the video? You want him included? Prominently, Harold confirmed. His journey is far more instructive than mine. I simply continued being who I always was. Officer Reyes had the courage to become something better. As the reporter departed with her unexpected angle, Harold found himself approached by Officer Reyes himself, who had overheard the exchange. You didn't have to do that, sir, Reyes said quietly. Include me in the story. Most people would want to forget the person who humiliated them. Harold regarded the young officer with genuine approval. The story isn't about humiliation, Reyes. It's about growth, about recognizing that our worst moments don't define us if we learn from them. He adjusted his tie with characteristic precision. Besides, I think you've earned the right to be part of the narrative. You'll walking together toward the newly dedicated center, mentor and protege represented the full circle of the department's transformation, from dismissal to discovery, from mockery to mentorship, from judgment to growth. And as they passed officers who now greeted Harold with genuine respect, the Purple Heart tattoo, occasionally visible beneath his cuff, served as a reminder that worth is not determined by what is immediately visible, but by the depth of character and experience that lies beneath the surface. The following day, as Harold arrived at the precinct, he found something unexpected on his desk. A small, elegantly framed photograph of the original records room where he had begun his journey with the department. Beside it was a handwritten note from Captain Rivera. Where you began matters less than where you lead us. Thank you for both. Harold placed the frame carefully on his bookshelf, a reminder that sometimes the most significant journeys begin in the most unassuming places, and that true service requires no recognition to be meaningful. He then turned to the day's cases, ready to continue the work that had always defined him, not by title or accolade, but by the quiet excellence that speaks for itself. The ripple effects of Harold's presence at the Springdale Police Department extended far beyond the Harrison Street case. Cold cases were reopened with fresh, analytical approaches, clearance rates improved across multiple divisions, and a culture of methodical, evidence-based investigation began to take root throughout the department. Perhaps most significantly, a subtle but profound shift occurred in how officers interacted with the public. Inspired by Harold's story, many became more attentive to the insights of community members they might previously have dismissed. The elderly neighbor who noticed unusual patterns, the maintenance worker with access to multiple buildings, the school crossing guard who observed the same street corner every day for years. This evolving approach led to unexpected breakthroughs in several long-standing cases. A series of commercial burglaries was solved after officers seriously considered the observations of a night janitor. A missing persons case advanced when a retired teacher's seemingly unrelated recollections were recognized as significant. Officers began to understand that valuable intelligence could come from anyone, regardless of title or position. 6 months after Harold's revelation to the department, Chief Sullivan called a special ceremony in the precinct's largest conference room. Officers from every division attended, along with the mayor and several city council members. Captain Rivera had organized the event but kept its specific purpose confidential, even from Harold himself. As Harold entered the room, he was surprised by the assembled crowd and the formal atmosphere. Chief Sullivan gestured him to the front, where he reluctantly took a seat next to the podium. 6 months ago, Sullivan began, addressing the gathered department. The Springdale Police Department was fortunate enough to discover that we had been overlooking an extraordinary resource. Today, we formally acknowledge that oversight and recognize the contributions that have transformed our investigative approach. The chief detailed the impact of Harold's work, the successful resolution of the Harrison Street case, the development of the analytical training program now being adopted by neighboring jurisdictions, the improved clearance rates across multiple divisions, and the cultural shift in how officers approached investigations and community interactions. But perhaps the most valuable lesson, Sullivan continued, came not from Special Advisor Winter's formal instruction, but from his example. He reminded us that true expertise doesn't demand recognition, that service requires no title, and that wisdom often comes from the most unexpected sources. Sullivan then revealed the purpose of the gathering, the dedication of the department's newly established Analytical Investigation Center, which would serve as a regional resource for complex cases. A plaque beside the door read simply, "The Harold Winter Center for Analytical Investigation, where wisdom transcends rank." As Harold was invited to speak, he approached the podium with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his entire career. He surveyed the room, the officers who had once overlooked him now hanging on his every word, the leadership that had recognized the value in his approach, and in the front row, Officer Reyes, who had traveled the furthest journey of all. "I am honored by this recognition," Harold began, "but somewhat concerned by its focus on a single individual. The successes we've achieved over these past months haven't been the product of one person's wisdom, but of a collective willingness to question assumptions and consider new perspectives." He gestured to the assembled officers. "Each of you has contributed to this evolution in your own way. You've brought your unique experiences and insights to the table. You've been willing to reconsider established methods. Most importantly, you've demonstrated that a learning organization is far more effective than even the most brilliant individual." Harold's gaze settled on Officer Reyes. "Some of you have shown particular courage in challenging your own preconceptions. That kind of intellectual honesty is far rarer and more valuable than any technical expertise." He turned back to address the wider audience. "The plaque on this center bears my name, but the spirit it represents belongs to all of you. It stands for the principle that wisdom can come from anywhere, from a veteran detective or a rookie patrol officer, from a federal agent or a file clerk. Our job is not to presume where insight will emerge, but to remain open to recognizing it wherever it appears." As the ceremony concluded and officers approached to congratulate him, Harold noticed a young woman in civilian clothes waiting patiently at the edge of the crowd. When the officers had dispersed, she stepped forward and introduced herself as a reporter from the Springdale Gazette. "Mr. Winters," she began, "I'm working on a feature about your journey from volunteer file clerk to the namesake of the department's new investigative center. Would you be willing to share your story?" Harold considered her request with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "The story isn't really about me," he said finally. "It's about what happens when people look beyond appearances and titles to recognize the value each person brings." "That's exactly why it should be told," the reporter persisted, "especially in today's world where we're so quick to judge based on age or position." Harold was silent for a moment, then nodded. "On one condition. The story must include Officer Reyes and his role in this transformation. What might have remained a simple case of disrespect became a catalyst for positive change because of how he responded to it." The reporter looked surprised, The officer who made the video? You want him included? Prominently, Harold confirmed. His journey is far more instructive than mine. I simply continued being who I always was. Officer Reyes had the courage to become something better. As the reporter departed with her unexpected angle, Harold found himself approached by Officer Reyes himself, who had overheard the exchange. "You didn't have to do that, sir," Reyes said quietly. "Include me in the story. Most people would want to forget the person who humiliated them." Harold regarded the young officer with genuine approval. "The story isn't about humiliation, Reyes. It's about growth, about recognizing that our worst moments don't define us if we learn from them." He adjusted his tie with characteristic precision. "Besides, I think you've earned the right to be part of the narrative." The article, published the following Sunday, became one of the most read pieces in the Gazette's recent history, titled, "The Invisible Expert: How a Retired FBI Agent's Humility Transformed a Police Department." It detailed Harold's quiet service as a file clerk, the mocking video that had led to his temporary dismissal, and the subsequent revelation of his extraordinary background. But true to Harold's request, it gave equal weight to Officer Reyes's journey from arrogance to redemption, framing the story not as one of humiliation, but of mutual growth and institutional transformation. The response was immediate and widespread. Local television stations picked up the story, conducting interviews with Chief Sullivan and Captain Rivera about the department's cultural evolution. Police departments across the state reached out to inquire about Harold's training methods. Most surprisingly, the FBI's regional office contacted Chief Sullivan to discuss implementing similar approaches to knowledge sharing across hierarchical boundaries. Through it all, Harold maintained his characteristic reserve, declining most interview requests and continuing to focus on his work. The center that bore his name quickly became a hub of innovative investigative approaches, drawing officers not just from Springdale, but from surrounding jurisdictions, eager to learn from the quiet elderly man whose insights had proven so valuable. 9 months after Harold's revelation to the department, a case emerged that would test their new approaches more profoundly than any before. A series of seemingly random assaults had occurred throughout Springdale over the previous 6 weeks. Different neighborhoods, different victim profiles, no apparent connection between incidents. The only commonality was the unusual violence of the attacks and the fact that all occurred at night with no witnesses. The investigation had stalled despite the department's best efforts. Multiple detectives were assigned, extensive canvassing was conducted, and all available forensic evidence was analyzed. Nothing yielded a clear pattern or suspect. It was during one of Harold's regular case review sessions that a new perspective emerged. He had established a practice of periodically gathering officers from different divisions to review ongoing investigations, believing that fresh eyes often saw what specialists missed. This particular session included Detective Sawyer, Officer Reyes, and several patrol officers who worked the neighborhoods where the assaults had occurred. "We've been approaching this as a traditional assault case," Harold observed, studying the caseboard they had assembled. "Looking for connections between victims, searching for witnesses, analyzing physical evidence. But what if we're dealing with something entirely different? Different how?" Sawyer asked, intrigued. Harold rearranged the incident reports chronologically. "Look at the timing pattern. Every attack occurred between midnight and 2 a.m., each in a different neighborhood, but all within a 5-mile radius of downtown, all on nights when the moon was at less than quarter strength." Officer Reyes leaned forward, studying the pattern. "Dark nights, less chance of being seen." "Yes, but there's more," Harold continued. "The victims appear random at first glance. Different ages, genders, races, occupations. But they share one common attribute." He pointed to the medical reports. Every victim was walking alone, wearing headphones or earbuds. Distracted, Sawyer realized, less aware of their surroundings. Precisely, Harold nodded. This isn't random violence, it's predatory behavior with specific targeting criteria. Isolated individuals whose situational awareness is compromised in low-visibility conditions. One of the patrol officers, Chen, spoke up hesitantly. That sounds almost like military tactics. Identify vulnerable targets. Strike when conditions favor the attacker. Harold turned to her with interest. An excellent observation, Officer Chen. It does indeed resemble tactical targeting. He studied her thoughtfully. You have military background? Chen nodded. 4 years, Army military police, nothing special. On the contrary, Harold countered, your perspective is exactly what we need here. He turned back to the group. Officer Chen has identified something critical. These attacks show planning and methodology consistent with tactical training. Our perpetrator likely has military or law enforcement background. This insight shifted the entire investigation. Rather than searching for connections between victims, they began examining the attacks through the lens of tactical operations, analyzing approach vectors, escape routes, timing patterns, and environmental factors that would appeal to someone with tactical training. Officer Chen, whose background had previously seemed unremarkable to her superiors, suddenly found herself at the center of the investigation. Harold paired her with Reyes to develop a geographical and temporal pattern analysis, utilizing her military experience and his growing analytical skills. Within 3 days, they had identified a pattern invisible to conventional investigation. The attacks, when mapped according to moon phase and local lighting conditions, revealed a clear progression, moving outward from the city center in a spiral pattern, something only apparent when viewing the city as a tactical environment rather than separate neighborhoods. He's methodically testing different environments, Chen explained during the briefing. Each location offers slightly different tactical challenges, varied escape routes, different lighting conditions, diverse population densities. It's almost like he's conducting training exercises, Reyes added, using real victims instead of practice targets. Harold nodded gravely, which suggests our perpetrator is preparing for something larger. These attacks may be rehearsals for a more significant event. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, a sanitation worker who had been reading about the investigation in the Gazette. Inspired by the story about Harold and the department's new approach to community information, he contacted Officer Chen directly rather than dismissing his observation as insignificant. I do the 3 a.m. route downtown, he explained. For the past few weeks, I've noticed the same car parked near Thompson Park on my rounds, a dark sedan, always in a different spot, but always with a clear view of the jogging path. Guy inside never gets out, just sits watching. Figured it was maybe an undercover cop, so I didn't think much of it until I read about these attacks. This information, combined with Chen and Reyes's pattern analysis, allowed the department to establish a surveillance operation focused on Thompson Park and surrounding areas. Within 2 nights, they identified the vehicle and its occupant, a former military contractor with specialized training in covert operations, recently returned from overseas deployment with documented psychological issues. The arrest was conducted with tactical precision, led by a team that included Officer Chen in a key planning role. Evidence recovered from the suspect's home confirmed their analysis. Detailed maps of Springdale with attack sites marked, journals describing the training exercises, and plans for what appeared to be a mass casualty event scheduled for the upcoming city festival. The successful resolution of the case garnered national attention, with federal agencies expressing interest in the analytical methods that had identified a threat traditional approaches had missed. Chief Sullivan ensured that both Officer Chen and Reyes received formal commendations alongside Harold, whose guidance had shaped the innovative approach. In the aftermath, Harold found himself in his office late one evening, reviewing case materials for the next day's training session. A knock at his door revealed Captain Rivera. "I thought you might still be here," she said, entering with 2 cups of coffee. "Some habits never change, do they?" Harold accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "The good ones shouldn't." Rivera settled into the chair across from him. "I wanted to tell you personally before the announcement tomorrow. The FBI has approached us about establishing a formal partnership between their Behavioral Analysis Unit and our Analytical Investigation Center. They're calling it a pilot program for integrating tactical and analytical methodologies across jurisdictional boundaries." "Bureaucratic language never changes either," Harold observed with a slight smile. "The point is," Rivera continued, "what started here, what you started, is expanding far beyond Springdale. Your approach is changing how investigations are conducted across agencies." Harold was quiet for a moment, contemplating this development. "It wasn't my approach, Eleanor. It was simply reminding people to look beyond the obvious, to value insight regardless of its source." He gestured to the case files on his desk. Officer Chen's military experience, Reyes's digital aptitude, a sanitation worker's observational skills. The solutions were always there. We just needed to listen for them in places we weren't accustomed to looking. "And that's precisely why this program matters," Rivera insisted. "How many other departments are overlooking valuable perspectives because they don't come with the right rank or credentials?" The following morning, Harold arrived at the precinct to find an unfamiliar face waiting outside his office, a man in his 60s wearing a well-tailored suit that subtly suggested federal credentials. He introduced himself as Deputy Director, Marshal from FBI headquarters. "Mr. Winters," he began with a respectful nod. "Or should I say, Special Agent Winters. It's been a long time." Harold studied the man carefully before recognition dawned. "Robert Marshall, you were a fresh academy graduate when I was heading the counterintelligence task force in '92. "I was," Marshall confirmed with a smile. "You probably don't remember, but you took the time to review my first field assessment. Tore it apart, actually, but in a way that taught me more than a semester of classroom instruction." "I remember," Harold surprised him by saying. "You had overlooked a pattern in the surveillance reports because you were too focused on the primary suspect." Marshall laughed. 30 years later, and you still remember the specifics. That's impressive." "I remember people who learn from correction," Harold replied simply. "You revised that assessment with remarkable insight for a rookie agent." The 2 men spent the morning discussing the FBI's proposed partnership, with Marshall explaining that Harold's methods had attracted attention at the highest levels of the Bureau. What had begun as a local police department's cultural transformation was now being considered as a model for federal-local collaboration. "We'd like you to serve as the primary liaison," Marshall explained. "Your background in both federal and local law enforcement makes you uniquely qualified to bridge these worlds." Harold considered the proposal thoughtfully. "I'm honored by the offer, but I believe there might be a more effective approach." He outlined an alternative, a collaborative team that would include Officer Chen with her military background, Reyes with his analytical skills, and Detective Sawyer's investigative experience, with Harold serving as mentor rather than primary operator. "The future of this work isn't in my generation, Robert," Harold explained. "It's in theirs. My role should be transitional, helping establish the framework while preparing them to carry it forward." Marshall studied him with newfound respect. "Still teaching after all these years. Some things never change." He extended his hand. "We'll structure it your way. The Bureau would be honored to partner with your team. The formal announcement of the FBI partnership occurred 1 year to the day after Officer Reyes had posted his mocking video of the old file clerk. The symmetry of the timing wasn't lost on anyone, least of all Reyes himself, who now stood beside Harold at the press conference, a transformed officer whose journey had become emblematic of the department's evolution. As reporters gathered for the announcement, Harold noticed a familiar face among them, the Gazette reporter who had written the original story about his revelation to the department. She caught his eye and gave a small nod of acknowledgement, recognizing as he did how far this journey had come. Chief Sullivan handled most of the press conference, explaining the partnership's structure and potential impact. When asked about the origins of the innovative approach that had attracted federal attention, he gestured to Harold. "Sometimes the greatest expertise wears the humblest disguise," Sullivan said. "A year ago, Special Advisor Winters was organizing our file room. As a volunteer, today, his methodologies are reshaping how multiple agencies approach complex investigations. The lesson for all of us is clear. Wisdom doesn't always announce itself with credentials or titles. Sometimes it quietly organizes your filing cabinets, while waiting for you to notice its value." As the formal proceedings concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Officer Reyes approached Harold with an unusual request. "Sir, I was hoping you might join me for lunch. There's someone I'd like you to meet." Harold agreed, curious about the young officer's request. They walked to a small cafe near the precinct, where an elderly man in a janitor's uniform was waiting at a corner table. "Special Advisor Winters, this is my grandfather, Miguel Reyes," the officer introduced them. "He's been the head custodian at City Hall for 37 years. The older Reyes stood to shake Harold's hand, his grip firm despite his age. "My grandson has told me much about you, Mr. Winters, about the lessons you've taught him." "Your grandson is an exceptional officer," Harold replied. "He's developed remarkable analytical skills." "He gets that from his abuela, not me," the elder Reyes smiled. "But what he's learned about respect that I hope comes partly from me." He gestured for them to sit. "Jason asked me here today because he wanted you to know something." Officer Reyes looked uncharacteristically emotional. "My grandfather was the one who first taught me that wisdom doesn't depend on titles or education. He left school after 6th grade, but can solve building problems engineers with degrees can't figure out. He speaks 4 languages he taught himself. City Hall runs smoothly because of him, but most people there don't even know his name." The elder Reyes shook his head modestly. "I just do my job." "That's the point," Officer Reyes continued, looking directly at Harold. "I forgot that lesson somewhere along the way. Became too impressed with my badge, my position, started judging people by their titles instead of their character." He glanced at his grandfather. "When I told him what happened with you, he wasn't surprised. Said I'd lost my way, but found it again through a hard lesson." Harold studied the two men, the humble custodian whose dignity was evident in his bearing, and the young officer whose journey from arrogance to humility had helped transform an entire department. "Some lessons must be relearned by each generation," Harold observed, "and sometimes the most valuable education comes from our mistakes rather than our successes." The elder Reyes nodded in agreement. "In my country, we say the tallest tree must bend lowest to survive the strongest winds. Pride makes us brittle, humility gives us strength." And as they shared their meal, Harold realized he was witnessing something profound, the completion of a circle that had begun with mockery and dismissal, but was ending with respect and wisdom passed between generations. The journey hadn't just transformed Officer Reyes or the Springdale Police Department. It had reaffirmed timeless truths about human dignity and the value of experience that transcended any single institution. When Harold returned to the precinct that afternoon, he found a small package on his desk. Inside was a framed photograph of the original records room where he had begun his journey with the department, along with a handwritten note from Captain Rivera, "Where you began matters less than where you lead us. Thank you for both." Beside it lay a departmental memo announcing the first class of the new joint FBI Springdale PD training program. The instructor roster listed Harold Winters as lead facilitator, with officers Reyes and Chen serving as program coordinators. Among the guest speakers was Miguel Reyes, listed as Infrastructure Security Specialist, City Hall, a title that finally acknowledged what he had always been, rather than the custodian most had assumed him to be. Harold placed the frame carefully on his bookshelf, a reminder that sometimes the most significant journeys begin in the most unassuming places, and that true service requires no recognition to be meaningful. He then turned to the day's cases, ready to continue the work that had always defined him, not by title or accolade, but by the quiet excellence that speaks for itself. The Purple Heart tattoo on his arm, once hidden beneath carefully rolled sleeves, now occasionally caught the light as he worked. It had become not just a reminder of past service, but a symbol of the unexpected ways a life of dedication continues to unfold, creating ripples that extend far beyond what any single person might envision. That evening, as Harold prepared to leave the precinct, he paused to observe the bustling activity around him, officers sharing insights across divisions, civilian staff contributing perspectives without hesitation, a community volunteer being attentively interviewed by a detective about observations from his neighborhood watch. The culture had shifted in ways both subtle and profound, creating an environment where wisdom was valued regardless of its source. As he walked toward his car, Harold noticed Officer Chen in the parking lot, deep in conversation with a young cadet who had recently joined the department. The officer caught his eye and gave a respectful nod before returning to her explanation, passing along insights in the same way Harold had shared his. Not demanding recognition for her expertise, but simply ensuring knowledge continued to flow to those who could use it well. Harold smiled to himself as he drove home through the streets of Springdale, the city he had quietly served first as an anonymous file clerk, and now as the namesake of an innovative investigative center. The journey had come full circle, from dismissal to recognition, from mockery to respect. But more importantly, it had created a legacy that would continue long after any single individual. A culture that recognized the extraordinary potential hidden in ordinary appearances and the wisdom that often speaks most profoundly through those we are most likely to overlook. If you believe true value transcends appearances and that wisdom often comes from unexpected sources, type respect in the comments below. And subscribe to see more stories that remind us to look beyond the surface to discover the extraordinary within the ordinary. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.